Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
What's up, Doom Nation, and welcome back to another episode of the Two Doom Men podcast. As always, it's Skaggs and you're truly the captain. What's going on, buddy? Who do we got with us? What are we doing today?
Yes, sir. We're back, and we got an interesting one, kind of a follow-up to our last episode where we're talking about the situation in Russia and the Wagner Group and all that stuff. Interestingly enough, while the episode was going on, I got like 15 comments on it. I'm like, what the fuck's going on? Usually nobody ever, interacts.
What is this?
Yeah,
what is this?
And there was our buddy here, Kasimir. He was watching the episode. I don't know how you came about it. And you were kind of like watching what we were talking about, and then you were kind of responding in the comments there as the episode was premiering.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, and then you messaged me and you're like, hey man, I think you're getting like bad information from somewhere. And we talked, and you wanted to come on the show. So we're always open to anybody coming on the show.
Yeah.
Especially fans or people watching. So that's the story. So we are joined today by Kasimir. What's up, buddy?
Thank you. I'm Kasimir. You can find me at Free Kasimir on Twitter. About me, I recently became anarcho-capitalist, maybe a year or so ago. Okay. Used to be sort of a right-wing minarchist.
I see where this is going and why Skaggs found you. All right.
Similar time frame.
We're in the same circles
sure.
On Twitter. And I saw your show on Twitter, and I'm interested in people covering the topic. And I know you guys are, fairly good faith. So, but I've heard you guys were reading articles from mainstream media, and they are, like, in my mind, like laughably bad at covering the topic.
Well, yeah, we did read one from antiwar.com also, which is more of the Libertarian website. But I will say, to defend us, we did preface it by saying, take it with a grain of salt. This is coming from the AP or whatever.
MSNBC or whatever we read.
Yeah.
So,
right.
So real quick, man, why don't you tell us about yourself? Like,
give a little background.
Where you're from, a little bit of your own background. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm an American citizen, but I'm originally from Russia. So I was born there. My heritage is Russian and Jewish. And I've spent the last more than 15 years in the United States. So I'm definitely, and generally my politics have been like, in terms of ends, very much, American patriot nationalist type.
Sure.
But I've more and more, the more I delved into like the means and to the philosophy, I realized that I can't support the contradictions in classical liberalism. And as I became more anarchist, I still have the same goals, but I understand that some of the things I just can't reach. And so what did bring me a lot closer to libertarianism initially was reading Hans Hermann Hoppe, a few articles initially, then a couple of these books. And I realized, there's a lot to these means, except this is not like pacifism. This is actually credible means. And in fact, they seem to match my historical knowledge. So the more I delve deeper into, our historical past in the United States, just out of interest, the more anarchist it seems to me rather than statist. And so that was sort of the eureka moment where, we can actually do that without, without a big government, and then without a government period, at least the way it's known right now.
Yeah, it's interesting to see certain people, including myself, go along that journey. And you do kind of have that eureka moment at some point when you're reading. For me, it happened while I was reading Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State. Eventually something just clicks and you get it. You understand, like the construct of the state and how it's almost a faith-based religious thing to some extent and all that stuff. I don't like to get too much into the weeds on that stuff because we got pressing issues in the real world.
Yes.
But it is interesting, of course.
Yeah. After reading the Anatomy of the State, I'm still, not as anarchist as you guys might be, but it opened up my eyes to, like, no, the state's the problem. Like, it's always been, the state will always be created out of nothing. It'll always be there over, what is it, like 500 people or something like that. So if you get it small, you can make a nice little family community. But once you're over 500, the state is going to rear its ugly head and, take charge. The weak will, the strong will overcome the weak.
Yes, yes, of course. I just want the strong to be like a business leader instead of
Yes,
an elected
Impressive.
official.
A dictator. Yeah.
Yeah, well, America was built by those, and then, you know, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, they have a very bad name among classical liberals and liberals in general. But if you read into their history, compared to other actors at the time, they were, you know, progressive in the good sense of the word, and politically, and they did a lot of the things we currently benefit from. So I feel like there's certainly been a little bit of historical betrayal going on there by public education.
Could be. I think one of the lessons I've learned the past couple of years also is that there's always going to be elites in society. There's just going to be people who are good at things and better than you at stuff. And we could either have like elites that are really impressive and good, like, I don't know, and Elon Musk comes to mind, or we could have elites that are not impressive, like a Joe Biden, right? Who are not like merit-based, good at anything, just kind of like game this system that exists to get power and rule over people.
Joe Biden does have a strong elite. It's just not him. It's the people behind the curtain.
The people who pull the strings.
Yeah, he's the perfect president for that type of oligarchy.
Correct. The deep state.
All of his negatives are suddenly positives.
Yeah.
Because
the media said so.
Trump, who I did vote for both last times as a hand grenade candidate, he has the exact opposite quality for the deep state. Complete unpredictability and
no allegiance to them.
Yeah, and a nutcase, which is like contradictory to government. And we're going to talk about a nutcase today as well, I hope.
Yeah, definitely. So like I was saying, we're going to kind of follow up the last episode where we talked about the Wagner coup and Yevgeny Prigozhin and Vladimir Putin and the whole situation that occurred. Cass, you know, we're commenting on, you're saying we were getting bad knowledge. I have since read a couple things. I watched a podcast with Colonel Douglas McGregor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. And kind of, you know, has educated me a little bit more. But then again, Colonel Douglas McGregor is American as well. So I really want to hear your take as to what exactly happened. And then a little bit later on, we'll talk about a little bit of a more recent story coming out of Ukraine and Russia about the Zaporizhzhia. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher that.
Zaporizhzhia power plant.
Oh, okay. The Zaporizhzhia power plant, and how
everyone's
on edge that this thing's about to blow. And we'll get into a little bit of that later. But go ahead, man. Like, give us your take on what exactly happened with the Wagner Group and the coup and all that.
So first of all, I want to start by saying they're not a private military corporation. They're not a PMC. They're a PMC cover for a government institution. And that government institution has a name that's very similar. You'll find it very familiar to Americans. The direct translation in our language would be Central Intelligence Agency.
I knew that was the second you said a cover for an intelligence agency, I was like, oh, it's the Russian CIA. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're trying to say that the Wagner Group is in a sense like is directly affiliated with the Russian CIA, like that's their armed branch, like military branch.
We don't know how deep. We don't know anything about whether the structure is still alive and to what extent. But we do sort of hypothesize that the Soviet power structures translated after the 90s were resurrected in the new Russian Federation, and the power structure was one of them was the GRU, Главный разведывательный директорат, which is the main intelligence directorate. Main or central, you know, so very similar even in name.
Sure.
Now, these were military intelligence. A good way to learn about them in just a very accessible book. I recommend, I think it is called Aquarium by Viktor Suvorov, which is the pseudonym of a Russian spy that defected and lived the rest of his life in the United States and Canada. And I think Britain first, then the United States. And he wrote, he was an insider. He was recruited out of the Russian military as a tank unit, as a tank commander. He passed their tests, and then he spent some time in Europe doing what they do best, which is steal American technology by approaching people openly and paying them. And And but the training he received is in like espionage, evasion, all of the James Bond type of stuff. Not like the gadgets, but the actual keeping cover and not allowing people to track you. So that's what the Soviets were good at, which was intelligence on the personal level, while Americans were busy with gadgets and spy satellites.
Right. Sure. Well, you make use of what you have, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
right? If you don't have the tech and the gadgets, you got to make use of the cunning and the espionage angle of things.
Yeah, and people's greed and desire for money, which is
right.
the easiest.
And then you create blackmail, and and here we are today.
Yes. So it's a very similar organization, and it has a very similar relationship to the FBI, which is absolute despise, which is like the KGB. So the more internal defense agency, which is now named the FSB. Mm-hmm. And they have a rivalry. They're like two pillars of power that are fighting each other behind the curtain, like not openly, right? It's like a cold war between those groups.
Between agencies, in a sense.
Agencies. Yeah. Vladimir Putin was a KGB guy who was stationed in Berlin as like if I'm not mistaken, an analyst, not an actual field agent. Then became political as an assistant to, I think, the governor of the St. Petersburg area, or maybe the mayor. And after that mayor, I think, died to, I don't remember if it was something bad, but from there, he basically got picked as the replacement for Yeltsin. So that was his transition into power was related to these power groups, and they all approved him in part because he was a company man. Now there's no like former in any of these units, but it is also clear that most likely he's now in, or at least he was in fairly solid control, at least of the KGB side, because 20 years, 12 plus years in power, it's just what's supposed to happen. Now, the other pillar of power in Russia is the Russian military and the MOD, the Ministry of Defense. And then Putin created two more groups. One of them is the Wagner Group. And we should talk about how it was created as well, because it might say what exactly is the level of influence between the GRU and that group. And then he also created the Chechen battalion, which is Akhmat Kadyrov and Battalion Akhmat, which have roughly the same number of people. They're in like the tens of thousands. So maybe some say 20,000, 12,000, rough numbers. The relationships between the groups are of a certain level of hate. So the military of defense invaded Chechnya to take control of the oil pipes and an oil transfer, and to stop, the sort of freedom activity that was going on that was related to oil, and local warlords wanted to take control of that and fighting Russia against that. And the way Russia solved the conflict after two not very successful wars, like quite bloody conflicts there, and lots of terrorist acts, is they bought them. They are sending a huge amount of money every year to Chechnya, and Grozny, which was a city leveled to the ground. If you look at pictures right now, you'll see skyscrapers. Everything's beautiful, beautiful minarets of mosques, and they have a very thriving society that looks like someplace in Saudi.
Okay.
Thriving on what? On getting a cut from oil money.
Okay. Yeah.
And those guys, they are like Jedi in Russia.
I was gonna say, I've heard that the Chechens, they're like the best elite soldiers you could possibly have, to some extent. That they are really like a military culture there. This is
yes,
what I've
definitely.
Yeah.
Because if I say otherwise, they would get to me.
They're gonna come after you. Okay.
Yes. No, I would say
Jedi,
they were
that's
tested.
A good way to put it.
They were battle tested. Okay. But I don't think they're the kind of guys that like to like really go into the meat grinder. They seem to be more of the guys who like to be on the cleanup crew. Just, perfectly fine for them. But they're definitely powerful within Russia. And and they are antagonistic to the military because they fought the military, they killed each other, and now they have more respect than the military because they can go into Moscow, kill a guy, have it directly linked to them, and nothing will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knows in Russia that you can't badmouth them. Even if you sit in the United States, they're probably the scariest group in the world because of how free they are to do whatever they want with the cover of a nuclear nation. But in terms of where they're located in Chechnya. I'm not aware of them operating anywhere else in the world.
So this might be a stupid question, but then how come we're just Russia's not just sending them over to Ukraine?
Yeah, like are they
to like clean house?
in
yeah,
Ukraine
they were there.
Okay,
they were there early on in Mariupol. They were there doing house to house, cleanup of like the remnants.
Mm-hmm.
They were there. I don't know how they fought. I have no idea. But I know that in terms of active duty, that was the first time I've heard of them being in active duty since the war in Chechnya. Now, the war in Chechnya, those guys, there is a lot of experience there in terms of guerrilla warfare, destroying army columns, ambushes, that type of stuff. There's lots of video of them doing that type of activity. So as partisans, I think they're really, really strong.
Okay.
Now, what they do in a sense is they counterbalance the Russian military. The Russian military is millions of people, but spread very widely and controlled more feudally. It's like local warlords, a general here, a general there, many generals. And most of these generals are incapable in themselves to start a coup. And if any of them, if there's any, indication to that, you can send Kadyrov to solve that problem.
Sure.
Without going directly from Putin, with a phone call to Kadyrov, there is action.
Right.
Now, there is another group, which was the GRU. For decades, during the Cold War, the CIA was training people all over the world for combat. We have special forces that we send, SEAL teams, special forces that go out and train people on the ground. And the Soviets were doing the same thing, and the Russians continued doing the same thing. So when there is some gold mine in Africa that presents an opportunity for a military company, the GRU would send their military guys there, and this is what they're doing right now to this day. They're securing gold mines. They're allowing the heavy equipment to come in unopposed by the locals to extract the gold. The politicians locally get a cut. The Russian government gets the majority cut, and the military company gets, its funding.
Right, it's cut. So on the last episode, we did kind of references that people were saying that the Wagner Group was very active in Africa. Would that, kind of be what we're talking about here, that they were there doing that sort of operation before that? So that is true.
Yes, and if there is any government that's friendly to Russia and has a coup attempt or has right. Al Qaeda comes knocking, then those guys are there to fight them off for a price of local influence, local economics, resource extraction, stuff like that. But they seem to have a very good reputation because the amount of money that I've heard is like in the trillions. I'm not sure of rubles or dollars, but in any case, large sums that are flowing. And in terms of internally in Russia, this is another counterweight to the military, with the purpose of if the FSB tries a coup using their special forces, then Putin can use the GRU as a counterweight. If the military does something fishy, the GRU can investigate them, or the KGB can investigate them. So he's balancing these groups inside Russia.
So he basically has several militaries at his will.
And he's baked into the cake like fail safes against each other. I see like they each got their own purpose. Like one's getting well funded, the other one's like the straight military, the other one's full of spies and espionage. Like he's got his fingers in every pot.
Yes, but there are problems brewing. One of them is that the military very much likes peace. The military likes to sit there and just make money by
collect
making
paychecks.
Yeah, collect a paycheck.
collect paychecks.
Yeah, they're a
make the
government
military,
program at the end of the day, right? So
let the military guys build all their houses. The soldiers are working as like day laborers at a job site. They're building barracks. They're they're collecting budget money and splitting it, and there's a whole bunch of stuff like that going on. Not very good for actual military combat. And if you think about who did most of the fighting in the past 20 years, well, these are special forces units. So Syria, these are again Wagnerites came out of Syria. In Syria, they were under a different name, but Syria was their last sort of Russian military sort of involvement. But involvement not from regular units, but from contract units, basically people who are like in our circles would be ex-military, ex-special forces, become quote unquote private. Right. And this gives the Russian government also a lot of credible deniability. Just like in the famous phone call, our American Ministry of Department of Defense called Putin basically and asked, "Are these your guys in Syria?" And Putin's underlings and ich tam нет, there's nobody there, and right. So Americans could bomb those mercenaries. I think they killed some like 50 guys of Wagner during that day in Syria, and hundreds of others auxiliaries that they had recruited with them. And they killed them over an attempt to do the same thing they do in Africa: just take over an oil field, establish security, split the profits with the local government, in this case Assad or whoever else will be there. So that's the MO of Wagner. But let's talk briefly about Prigozhin. So I think it's a joke that everybody calls him like the hot dog vendor.
Yeah, to be honest with you, and we harped on that in the last episode. It is fucking funny, and it was a little bit tongue in cheek what we were saying. Yeah, I know that he's a hot dog vendor thing is exaggerated and all. Yeah,
it's you take any guy and you call him lemonade stand vendor or like a newspaper delivery man.
The way to dismiss them.
He happened to have a career afterwards. Let's look at his career. So his career was, yes, a hot dog stand as a manager, as far as I understand correctly, and then first a stint in jail for I don't remember what, but like quite a significant stint in jail. So he's an ex-con and of a particular type. In like the Russian prison has its own laws. And he was a guy who survived and thrived in prison for sure. So he wasn't like cleaning the bathrooms or becoming an untouchable. In fact, he was probably some kind of a authority figure,
a capo or something in the prison.
Yeah,
the prison, right?
Yeah, he thrived once he got into prison, and he really found like his groove, I guess you could say.
I think so, and you see this from his personality because he has like the mannerisms of a typical criminal sort of syndicate insider, like a capo, as he said, in Russia. In the way he even talks to the inmates, like very, very much straight up the way they talk. And so then he becomes a manager of restaurant businesses, and he manages to create some kind of a boat restaurant. Where the security and the quality is so high that the World Economic Forum chooses it as one of the spots to eat in, I think it was either Moscow or St. Petersburg, one of the two. They had there is a river in Moscow as well, so it must have been Moscow. And then after World Economic Forum and other members of the elite test the place out, Putin shows up, and the manager of the place becomes like the servant. So he gets a background check, he gets verified, even though he is an ex-con. He supposedly is so trusted at that point in the Russian power circles that he's allowed to serve plates directly to Putin, just like he was allowed to serve plates to others before.
I see where you're going with this too, right? Like you could even, I don't know if you watched Game of Thrones, right? But Russia reminds me a lot of Game of Thrones and that whole like dynamic. Like whoever's serving the king, like the king's guard would have to taste the food. We want to make sure we don't poison Joffrey or something like that. So I understand where you're coming from. Like if you are in a position where you're feeding Putin, boy, you must be really trusted, or at least trusted to some extent, or vetted to say
it's access to the body.
Right.
And Putin is clearly a person who by then knows how to examine personalities. So he notices, and he notices complete upstart, did everything within criminal circles clearly, but is considered trustworthy in criminal circles, trustworthy enough to do all of this, and what I'm tasting is good as well, right? And he organized that everything is, so there's a lot of like positives for him, and so he starts giving him more tasks. One of the tasks he gives him is we need to we have various channels of stealing money, and various channels of like enhancing things, making things more optimal. So one of those projects was feeding the military. The military in Russia used to cook its own food a lot of the time, but Prigozhin managed to, along with other people basically involved, managed to outsource all of it. So now Russians have MREs where they, largely various different food producers in Russia are organized in a supply chain. Prigozhin was in charge of that supply chain. Now, obviously, he both robbed it and shared the wealth, right? As they do.
As all elites do.
As the elites do. But it was effective enough. Just because, well, at least I heard some complaints, but
an upgrade compared to what they did before, which is kind of just figure it out on your own.
Yes.
He introduced structure. I guess you could say he was like a restaurant guy too, right? It would be a natural place you should thrive.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Putin said, well, okay, you've dealt with this task. I'm satisfied with my cut and with what you're providing. So let me try you in a new, do something with this online internet thing. And so what he does is he copies Americans and he creates a troll farm in St. Petersburg in a building that was later discovered and infiltrated multiple times. They have like rows of computers, and they hire people off the street to post comments on the internet. Yep. And those were the guys who were the target of all the conspiracy theories with Trump, because they posted like a few thousand comments.
They influenced the election and all this stuff, but right? And
they were fairly effective. I mean, I remember one of their impacts was The Guardian stopped providing comments on their website, in part because every time they wrote about Russia, they were receiving like a metric ton of the Prigozhin types there.
Well, you're seeing that throughout the entire internet all the time. Like right now, that's going on with Ukraine. Have you seen the NATO guys? They're I don't know if you've seen them. Like they have their avatars are like the Doge.
Yeah. Very cute.
Especially if you I've stepped on this landmine before many times. If you comment on something Zelensky posts on Twitter, you get hundreds of NATO accounts that are coming after you and saying this, saying that, etc. So I mean, yeah, to an extent, like that's what that is, and everyone's doing that. To be fair,
yeah, you reminded me of something very important. I wholeheartedly condemn the Putin's aggression in Ukraine, and well, actually. No joke. It is an aggression.
I thought you were here to spread Putin talking points. Yeah.
Innocent civilians have been targeted. So, from an ANCAP perspective, entirely unjustifiable mess. And so, I spent about a decade, even before that, I was always telling American right-wingers that Putin is not your friend. There's a lot of people who have like a false perception of him as this big hero.
I agree.
Bare-chested riding on a bear.
Yeah. Or
the meme version of him.
Yeah, people have these right-wingers have this idea of him now that he's like standing up against this Satanist world order or whatever. And I've tried to make the counterpoint of like he's just one bad guy fighting against another group of other bad guys to an extent. That's at least been my take.
I think he's the closest comparison in the American political system would be like the Clintons, just one-to-one type of thing. Like it's a political machine. So he's a political machine now, where he's the authority in charge. Is he? Does he have values? I think he has zero values.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah, it's now he has personal pride. He does want some reputation, but I think he has less of that than, say, somebody in China, in the Chinese Communist Party, at least the one before Xi. Those people build for the future. He's more like pretending.
Okay.
Now, So in 2014, now he has this guy who did multiple tasks for him, who's not a hot dog vendor anymore, but in fact, one of the most effective managers under Putin, and the one that is most easy to eliminate because, he has no backing of his own, no family. And he's also weakest in terms of there's oligarchs that say there's guys that control the oil business, that build all the pipes. Those guys operate with billions of rubles or millions of dollars, billions of dollars probably by now. They have real power structures focused on whatever they're doing, but they're not flexible. And so now he has this flexible guy, and at the same time, the GRU really need to become more organized, need to become more serious to get at that money. Syria doesn't go exactly the way they want. They want to become better than what they were in Syria, and they want to become more effective at collecting the tolls all over the world. So they build a giant network of supply that steals from the Russian military in terms of equipment, that takes from the military, that takes money from the oil money, and supplies it through various backdoor channels to Prigozhin and to Utkin, who is the military guy who is his co-founder. Utkin is actually the Wagner, that's his call sign. He's the guy with the swastika tattoos. And he himself is not the right type for Putin to trust. So he's too maybe ideological and also too brutal. So he's more like maybe in mentality used to be more like like a nationalist type, okay. Right? And that's not exactly what he wants. He wants more of a criminal type element.
Mm-hmm. Somebody he could work with. And yeah, I know what you're saying before, and even referring back to before, Putin kind of doesn't have any value structure. He's more of a whatever suits the moment type of thing to maybe, benefit them or something like that. Like he, in a sense, some sort of like pragmatism to an extent.
There is that combined with, there is a value. He does show up surrounded by gold everywhere.
Okay.
When he walks, his famous walk surrounded by the troops dressed as like Napoleonic War Russian troops, that conveys a value of I am the king.
Yeah. I'm
the emperor, in fact, the Emperor Putin. Gotcha. So there is that type of pride.
Power. Sure.
Yes. So what did we see with this coup? We saw, first of all, that the Kadyrovets, the Ahmad battalion, was not a frontline battalion in Ukraine, as far as I know. Maybe they'll correct me in the comments. Hi, guys. But, maybe I'm wrong. It could be wrong. I'm not a military analyst per se. But I know that at least in terms of reputation, Wagner becomes the #1 sort of power unit in the Russian military. And initially they work with the military, but very quickly they realize that it's not really working too well for them, so they become as independent as possible. They have their own independent air force, they have their own independent tanks, they have their own independent intelligence as the General Intelligence Directorate. They have their drones, they have a lot of their artillery, and the way it's distributed is very similar to sort of like mid-century Germany, or like basically any, and also maybe a little bit like America, which is very flat organizational structure. There's a single guy at the top who directs what we're going to achieve, and then the commanders decide, I'll take this, I'll take that, no, you take this. They rearrange the tasks,
carry out,
and then each one executes with his own tanks, with his own artillery, and then they trade and they do it. Even though they're not private, I do believe they act as if they're a
kind
private
of like little
military.
Franchises to an extent, something like that. Sure.
And it's very sort of flexible. It's very pick me up sort of culture there. One of the examples that they quickly run out of cannon fodder from the They initially used the locals as cannon fodder, as far as I understand, like local residents of Donbass and Luhansk. But that becomes really unpopular, and it sort of gets stopped at a certain point by, I think, Putin himself even. And what they do is they do this whole prisoner thing where he shows up at a prison, Prigozhin himself, and says, we have, join me, you have 15 years to life that you're serving here, whatever. I want the murderers. I want the guys who, have multiple, hard crimes with bodily damage. I don't want any of the, fluffy stuff. And I have like 3 rules for you. The only way you escape prison is, through, one of the deities carries you out in a casket, or you come out with me. And with me, you come out in 6 months of heavy combat, and most of you won't make it. But people who are rotting in prison, they're bored enough where
it's not a bad deal.
Yeah,
it's not a bad deal. They accept.
Especially if you're a killer, right? You could ply your trade.
Yes.
in the war.
You're already demented in the head, so might as well run in a battle.
Also, they plan to escape, many of them,
right?
And some of them actually do. It also becomes a thing that gets financed by people paying bribes to get out of prison that way. So it becomes a very lucrative deal. Even now, I think it continues. But what happens with these people is that the special forces act as the blocking brigades, as the executioners, and those guys are used as the fodder,
the first
cannon fodder,
right. Sure, run in
for frontal attacks where you send a whole bunch of the convicts in. Some of them make it into a position, and then your guys go right behind them. And what they do is they kill anyone that tries to retreat immediately. You even saw a few videos of that. And also, then when they find a weakness, then they punch through. So they do sort of like tank warfare, but with men, because it's city fighting. So you can't actually use tanks. But it's like penetration, and then the Wagner troops are the ones that do the
question for you?
What a terrifying image of like these
warfare.
Serial killers. Like who's coming? All the mass murderers they let out of like the gulag are their front line. So like once they get into position, they're just tearing people apart now for fun.
Well, the problem is also tearing each other apart. Like there's
sure.
stories of people getting pissed and like walking away. Oh, I'll go to a smoke, and then he tosses a grenade back at his buddies.
Jesus Christ!
You have like hardened psychos and criminals, and
what a
with
terrifying thought. Yeah,
and their losses are humongous to the point where the story sort of the enthusiasm to join those battalions dies down a little bit.
Right.
Okay.
Question for you, real quick: is this something that is historically a part of Russian warfare? Because I feel like the Soviet Union did something similar where they'd send in the group, like the front lines, and then behind them they'd set up like machine gun nests, and if anybody retreated, you'd get mowed down by your own guys. They're like, no, there is no retreat. To an extent. So I feel like I've heard of this before to some extent.
I think it's more active though. I think they're like literally following, like if they see a unit actually make it to the point where some even are like still like with comms, then they seem to come in.
They advance.
They advance, and they used some now you did say something very important. There is a video I said to you, we're not going to play it here, but there's a video about what Russians did in Georgia with the original conflict with Abkhazia, which was very similar in concept to the conflict of Ukraine. These are Russian military bases in Georgia, on the Black Sea and on the sea that they want to control, with oil pipes very nearby. And so what they do is they take mountain people that live in villages mostly away from the cities, the Abkhazian population, and they take the Georgian population that's in the cities. That's a generalization. I might be corrected by the locals. Sorry if I said anything wrong, but understand is that the group that's actually called like mountains people, whatever, suddenly attacks the Georgian government and declares independence and moves in and captures all the military bases along the coast and establishes the province and the country of Abkhazia. Now, the way they do that on video from those fights, Russian volunteers are helping them. And those volunteers are members of the special forces. Every single unit is represented there. There's like the Marine Special Forces, the Air Force Special Forces, and the Air Force bombs Georgian cities, and the Russians are lying and they're saying these are Georgians bombing themselves with airplanes with our stars. They're painting our stars. They're bombing themselves.
Yeah.
And then the Georgians take down one of the airplanes, and it shows up in that video. There's a star on it. The president of Georgia at the time, Shevardnadze, is right there, who's actually quite friendly to Russians, more or less. And he says, "Oh, that's the star they say we painted, ha ha ha." Yeah. And they even have like they identify the corpse of the pilot, who happens to be Russian and with a record, so they have proof. This type of activity by special forces, arming the locals and mounting a revolution, is what, as I said, the CIA and the GRU did all the time throughout the world. It was just like a continuation of the same Cold War.
The calling card, yeah.
It's like in America, it's also sometimes referenced as organized chaos. You create a chaos in the country, and then you come in and you rebuild it.
You solve the problem.
Yes.
Sure.
Now the Russians like that stuff. They like calling out American hypocrisy in Iraq and using that to power their own aggression. In terms of propaganda.
Yeah, I've heard that. And to be fair, sometimes they have a point, right? In terms of at least their own aggression here in Ukraine, that they would have a point. Like, who are you to judge, right? After you just spent the past 20 years going to war in 7 different countries and killing almost 1 million people in Iraq. That doesn't, again, we're libertarians here, we're anarcho-capitalists, aggression's not correct, but it is what it is, I guess you could say, right?
Now, the best part, now that we've established the background of them, now what actually happened over the past month? And it was, to me, extremely interesting. One of the most interesting events. We as libertarians, as ANCAPs in particular, especially people who understand like the theory, the iron law of oligarchy, the theory of power. Power always gets concentrated, and the number one threat to power is an internal revolution. It's what they all fear, and they can't avoid, because if the general is competent, he hates your guts and he wants to replace you. If the general is incompetent, he can't do the tasks that you want him to do. So you have to always balance, you have to use up a competent person and then lose them. Raise another competent person, then lose him. And this is why, Stalin has a history of, using executioners to execute a bunch of people, then bringing in new executioners to execute the executioners.
Right.
And he did like once or twice, including in the military. So the only time where where people like Stalin have problems is when they have an actual fight on their hands. When Germany is like attacking Moscow, and your central of power is about to fall, then you take a general in the Russian military, in the Red Army, and you tell him, do whatever you want, just get those guys off me. And suddenly all the stupid orders about not using, German guns, about, tactical limits fall away, and there's suddenly an anarchic military that operates as like a business that says what works, and also that has generals on the front line getting shelled.
Some skin in the game themselves. Yeah.
And funny enough is that as the Germans were losing in that war, they switched, became more centrally controlled. Hitler made more decisions, and as a result, the generals were like screaming bloody murder at the guy. And the competent ones were basically resigning or getting killed. So here there is something very similar occurring in Russia. And at first I thought it was a game. So GRU is playing a game where they need to demean the military. They need to lower the reputation of the military because it's a power struggle. They want more of the budget. Maybe they even get a cut of the military as a result. So they allow Prigozhin to start speaking openly as he did. And normally he would get reined in, but he doesn't get reined in, and it's a sign. And there's this famous video of him where he points at the bodies of, as far as I understand, mostly the convicts, and he says, Shoigu, and the other guy, where's my ammo? Now, he doesn't say how much ammo he needs. He doesn't say how much ammo he was actually getting. He gives vague percentages. So we don't even know if he's lying or not. But he's clearly demonstrating to all the Russians that are watching this over the internet that there's a new guy in town who's like a I'll do it type of guy, who's like a get it done.
John Wayne cowboy.
Yeah, he's on the front lines while all the generals are back in the comfort of their,
he's
staging
upset
grounds.
that some of his men have been killed. And Shoigu, who you're referencing, he's like kind of the defense minister.
Yes.
Right. And he would be the guy, I guess, in charge of supplying Wagner and them.
And Sirovikin, who is the supply general, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So he's like calling those guys out. Then the whole Bakhmut thing happens, where he alleges that the military was sending saboteurs to try to mine his people as they were leaving Bakhmut, and there was some kind of a fight between those two where they didn't provide them with enough artillery support. They were worried about their flanks. They were losing many men in Bakhmut, including from the top guys, because it's city fighting. You just can't get it done cleanly. But there was a lot of utility in them doing that, because also I think that Ukrainians did concentrate on that little piece of land way more than it warranted, because Wagner was there and making noise. So that city became possibly more strategically important than it should have been because of all of that nastiness happening.
Sure, that bore out too a lot in the rhetoric, even coming from Zelensky the whole time. He kept talking about how important Bakhmut was.
And
then as soon as they lost, he changed his tune and it wasn't really important at all.
Yeah, it's a city in like a little basin. There's heights surrounding it that are important to take, and the Russians took those heights, and then Prigozhin would show up on air and say, we're so weak, we're running out of ammo, we have 10% ammo. There would be like a surge of Ukrainians trying to take the city back. A lot of them would take losses, and then Prigozhin would appear very happy. We defended again. So how much of that was truthful game or not?
Baiting him. Yeah,
possibly. And then out of this, he gets a lot of political capital, and he goes on tour in Russia a few months ago, where he visits city by city like a political candidate and speaks to people, and gets a lot of local support, including from generals who say, you're doing good work. We really like what you're doing. And then, so towards the beginning of June, I believe they have to leave. They're saying they're going to leave Bakhmut, and they leave on time, as they say. And he just openly criticizes, the most horrible words possible, talks about Shoigu and the generals, and talks about how the war was pointless, how the war was, in fact, declared based on fake grounds, according to him. How there was no provocation from Ukrainians at all, how it was ill-timed, not necessary, could have been done much better through continued, had the power in all the negotiations, even with the reluctant United States that was potentially like egging them on, let's go, let's do it. So that becomes his message. And that message appeals to the generals in the military who are believing this is kind of like this is a mess. We're not gaining enough for the risks that we're taking. Russian elites don't like this fight because 2022 was the first year in history of the Russian government where actual sanctions were implemented. Prior to that, 2014, Crimea, everything, every single oligarch in Putin's circles could have their family and wife living in Florida.
It didn't affect them, right?
Yeah.
But now in 2022, right, there's the famous stories of their yachts getting boarded, raided, and then locked up, essentially stolen from them because of what's going on in Ukraine. Yeah.
Well, stolen goods, so not stolen bylaws.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true, sure.
Thieves taking from thieves.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Clearly, they're not happy about it. They're not happy that they can't spend a weekend in Davos or on the coast of France as they usually do.
Right.
The number one propagandist of Putin on the TV, Solovyov, he has a house in Italy. It's like several $1 million in a beautiful place. The Medvedev has an entire villa with wine grooves in Tuscany.
Now they can't go to those, right?
And they can't go to those. So it really sucks, and they start buddying with Prigozhin. Even that propagandist is seen with him on his radio show and his TV show. It's like, oh, look at this guy, is this charismatic guy
over there.
Yeah.
As far as I understand, the Ministry of Defense doesn't really like that this is happening, but at least part of it gets an order. Now, the last layer to understand all of this is the assassination layer. So how do various elements that Putin doesn't like get removed? Well, Navalny was the biggest case with this poisoning, but prior to that, there was also a poisoning of an ex-spy in Britain, which was revealed because it was a botched operation.
I remember this. Yeah.
With Navalny's poisoning, they revealed the entire network. So there was
Navalny
a network.
was who ran against Putin, right? He challenged Putin to some extent. Am I correct there?
Well, most political opponents to Putin, journalists, Ukrainian politicians, oligarchs, the amount of poisonings was just insane. There were so many people who were going down with diseases, with like similar type of symptoms where they become really weak, they become incapacitated, and they barely survive or they die from like weird circumstances, from heart attacks.
Right.
People who are not supposed to be there, and it also affects journalists. But this is clearly used as sort of intimidation tactic where, because it's poison that's hard to detect, it's very rare. It's very hard to measure an exact dose so the death occurs agonizingly, just right amount. They don't want the guy to fall over immediately. They want them to like travel a little bit and then go down.
Yeah,
because then
they can also then blame it on natural causes or something. Gives them a little bit of cover.
A little separation.
Yes, and the fact that it's a poison is also a perfect power, because sort of even if they survive, they're extremely paranoid. They can't live their life, and they basically surrender. And there is rumors that it happened to every single guy that's in that circle. Kadyrov is rumored to have been targeted at some point. I'm not sure if it did, but many of the political leaders are at least aware of this as a problem. Now, at a certain moment, Prigozhin understands that he's going to be next. That's from now on, it's pure hypothesis.
Right.
And the guy who I'm matching thoughts with is Mikhail Veller, who is a Russian writer and analyst. He's into like the psychology of the ruling class in Russia. Now, according to him, what starts happening is that the MOD of Russia declares that Prigozhin's troops will be integrated into the military. They will have to sign a contract with the military, right, and their private thing ends. So Prigozhin it feels like he's going to be removed from power. At the same time, he just gained a whole bunch of political capital, and his men really trust him and apparently really like him because he pays on time and he pays a lot. And so enough of them and enough of the people in his unit launch this coup, and it's very successful very quickly. Some of the units aren't aware of the coup, so he clearly only took a few thousand of his most trusted people, and nobody opposes them. That's very important. When he reaches Rostov, you see him sitting with the second in command of, I think, Shoigu and the regional commander. They're sitting and they're talking to each other with like great respect.
Yeah, when I saw those videos, it led me to believe like, oh man, Putin, something's going on here. So there must be in trouble, because they were entertaining someone who's combative to some extent to the state there.
He declared that he declared treason, and what every general has to do technically is arrest him immediately.
Right. But they're not. They're talking
Instead,
to
they're
him,
working
right.
with him.
Yeah, or avoid talking to him. And what we received is at least is complete total silence, neutrality. Two very strong local generals that were frontline generals spoke out from the same base, it seemed to be, against this in Russian. But what they said was very reconciliatory. It didn't say you're a traitor, stop, or you'll get killed. They said, please stop, you're ruining the country. You're threatening the security of our entire war effort and every Russian. Don't do this. Let's calm down. Let's talk about this like men. That is the opposite of what you expect from a powerful government. That was a clear sign of weakness. In fact, people started accusing them of treason because they weren't strong enough. And so for several hours that day, he's moving into Moscow, and Russia has nothing to oppose him because everything stands down. The border troops stand down, special forces stand down, all the blocking battalions that exist stand down, and then the Chechens get called, and Chechens say, oh, you traitor, we're going to stop you. But the Chechens are very late. They're stuck in traffic. Now, what's funny about this is if they really wanted to, Chechens are the type of guys, if they're stuck in traffic, then people are going to get killed, and then the bulldozer is going to just split the cars apart and just like drive through, because they don't care about Russian civilians at all. So them stuck in traffic is very suspect as an excuse. And when they reach the lines of the Wagner people, they both exit and they shake hands and they speak to each other. In most cases, it's like a friendly exchange. There's no combat between the units.
Right.
He eventually reaches several hours out of Moscow with and the only thing that attacks him, that really seems to have attacked him, was what you expect, the Air Force.
Right.
Also, there is indications that the Air Force were shooting at him, believing it's a Ukrainian, some kind of a breakthrough type of column. Okay. That there was an information vacuum in which some units still loyal to Putin got the right orders to attack him. But then he says that as soon as they learned, other units, when they learned who he is, stopped shooting.
Okay.
So some planes, apparently, according to Prigozhin, turned around. I don't know how much of it is true. And the types of units that are with him are so specialized and so deadly, they shoot down, according to some sources, 6 helicopters and 1 cargo plane, where Prigozhin says we were just too zealous. So they had mobile AA of maybe the book type, traveling with them, deploying ahead and controlling the airspace and shooting down very elusive, military helicopters. So it's not like an RPG in your back. These were very high-tech systems being used. Now, what happens? Why does the coup end so suddenly? The only reason is because one of the forces that could have still stopped him actually shifted sides. And the most likely culprit is the MOD. The MOD that for a moment, or for political reasons, played neutral, was through sufficient pressure convinced by whoever is actually in control around Putin, maybe himself, was convinced to flip the script, to say, no. We have enough units to stop these guys, and you're going to have a war. And when that happened, that's when the Wagnerites stopped, and they started negotiating over the phone. Lukashenko comes in as the negotiator, as I think more on his own initiative. I don't think his call was planned, but he becomes the only neutral party out of that entire power group that is actually neutral enough to talk and trusted enough to be trustworthy, to have his own interests separate from Putin. Putin's interest is to kill Prigozhin,
right?
Kill enough of the military commanders that were most loyal, and make everybody else afraid. But Putin can't do that. Why? Because my explanation is he's no longer in control. This is a sign of him losing as much of the political power, of the illusion of political power that we had of him. I don't believe he has as
So
much.
wait, is
after
he
this.
out of power now or in that moment?
Well, I think, well, we don't know. We don't have any new indicators of his power, but it could be that he's like the Queen of England now.
Mm-hmm.
He will
Figurehead.
show up.
Yeah,
They'll, truck him out, or one of his many
they'll all
doubles.
bow down. Yeah,
They'll like do he'll say something, but who is actually in control, we can't know. But what we can know is that all the indicators that they're giving us, maybe, there's a psyop theory that like all of this is invented. The psyop theory is that the Russian government created a psyop to appear as weak as possible. Now, I like, Sun Tzu and appear weak while you're strong and all of that stuff. But the problem for an authoritarian regime is that when it appears weak,
it is weak.
Normally,
it is weak because appearance is the entire strength. How is a small number of people controlling, 150 million others through intimidation, authority? Imagine like a godfather in the Italian mafia suddenly becoming, the punching bag for someone
for
of
another
a corner,
family. Yeah,
and having his center of power threatened. It just doesn't. I don't buy the psyop. They're like genius psyop guys.
Yeah, 4D chess type.
4D
thing.
chess.
Sure.
Now, was there a 4D chess initially when Prigozhin tried to create this chaos between him and the military? I think that's the fake. That was indeed a fake, where he's faking appearing weak so that Ukrainians attack positions that are well coordinated between Wagner and the military on the ground. On the front lines, they're really strong team players. I think that might have been the fake. But to have the coup be a fake, that's something entirely unprecedented in Russian history, but not unprecedented in world history. Mercenary units taking, like decapitating emperors was the most common thing in human history. You even had like an entire, I think in Turkey, there was an entire leadership swap where the mercenary units that were like trained, the eunuch, warriors that were trained and were deployed suddenly became the ruling class and in society for a few centuries. So it's more usual in human history where the mercenary
This is what I was saying, throughout most of human history, like an election is a bunch of guys get guns and get in trucks and they drive to the Capitol building. They say, pack your bags, buddy. You're getting the fuck out of here. Or they got their swords and got on horses and, rode to the king's castle or whatever it might be. Like, for the most part, throughout most of human history, that's exactly how an election occurred.
Yeah. And now who's let's say, who's the victor out of this? Lukashenko, who is the president, longest living and acting dictator in Europe, right?
Yeah, Belarus.
So politically, as much as he's like a despicable human being and like an authoritarian scumbag, it's a traitor to his people in most obvious ways. Also, he's politically brilliant. You have to recognize him as that, because he survived for so long. And even like the most concentrated coup attempt several years ago, which is a good example why people should be armed, because if his people were armed, there were enough people in the position where they could have totally dethroned him. But he literally beat his people like with sticks into submission. Now, and he was humiliated by Putin as a result. Putin had to send military units to suppress that rebellion. Now Putin is controlling his country by sending the nuclear weapons, which will be guarded by Russia.
That's how I've seen Lukashenko, that he's basically a vassal state to Putin and Russia at this point. Yeah.
Now suddenly he gets the opportunity to pull a flip. He will have the military base with Prigozhin. Prigozhin is going to train his military units with that military base. He's going to have an army that will now get reputation by contact with actual fighting men, because his military has never fought in like ever in their life.
This follows what we were talking about, Cap, a lot in the last episode, that the the three options that Putin kind of gave people, that you
Right.
could you can sign on with the Russian military, you can go home, or you could go to Belarus. We were like,
Yeah.
the free bus ticket to Belarus is like odd. Like, what
Yeah.
is that? What's going on there? So this kind of
Well, you get away scot-free.
explains that a little bit deeper, exactly what's going on there.
Well, I think that they will still be used in Africa as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they betrayed Putin, and in fact openly said we're going to remove you and we have a better candidate. That was said, if I'm not mistaken. And he doesn't kill, and I don't think he can kill them. I don't think they'll be poisoned.
They're too popular.
I don't think they'll have. No, it's not that they're.
I don't think Russia cares about that.
No, I don't think he cares about the popular. I think he just can't. Like, he won't reach them. I think people are up to his. They understand his game now. They understand they have to have food tasters. They understand that they're in medieval Europe. They're in Game of Thrones.
They have guns, right? At the end, we're libertarians, right? Like, they have guns to defend themselves with, and so does Putin, but so do they.
And they have the money, so they will now have this shaky piece. But I'm very inclined to doubt whether Putin is in charge anymore,
or fully.
Because
interesting.
Because there was always the power group in the background. When a leader displays such weakness, the power group will instantly pounce on that.
Yeah.
And this is like the moment to do a silent coup, which was there's complete chaos. And then, if his security got replaced during that chaos, that's it for him as a character.
Right.
He now becomes a puppet himself.
Right.
So that's the question that will be answered maybe in the next 10 years.
Okay. That's interesting.
Very interesting.
So, like I was telling you before at the beginning, I watched Colonel Douglas McGregor talking about this. He was on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, and how does this play into the actual war in Ukraine? Because Colonel Douglas McGregor is saying basically the war is essentially over. Russia's won it. The Ukrainians have lost almost all of their really good soldiers. The Russians are so dug in and fortified on the eastern side of Ukraine that there's no way that the Ukrainians can break through any of the. So how does that play into what exactly, in your opinion, is going on here in the war?
I think it's just I'm very cautious to express an opinion because it's a war of attrition.
Yeah.
And I don't know the supply lines. What I do know is that from the videos I see from the Russian side, they have discovered what works in this war, and it's a very ugly form of warfare that is very it's high tech and low tech, but in ways that we haven't seen. It's a combination of very low tech artillery, entrenchment, minefield strategy, just building minefields, I
watched an 11-minute long video of these Ukrainian soldiers trying to tiptoe through a minefield and constantly setting off mines and trying to crawl. It was hard to watch.
Yeah. There's now automatic machines that deploy mines. So it's much less dangerous. It's used much more widespread. Artillery, and there are clearly artillery guiding drones in the skies that are Russian, that are not getting shut down easily. Everything transferred to smaller drones on both sides. And from the action reels, also the Iranian and the Chinese supplied killer drones are heavily used. And I see how they become more and more efficient. And they're used as a combined arms, apparently. So I've seen images of drone hits that cannot be lethal to a tank. They don't seem like they could be lethal. People are saying, oh, they come in through the roof because the roof has less armor. All of that's true. But the drones don't appear big enough, and it's expensive to use big drones. But what it is if you hit the tank where you cause the crew to bail or to stop, or it gets incapacitated, or it loses vision devices, then what happens is then artillery comes in. And it's not mobile enough to avoid it. And artillery doesn't blow up a tank necessarily, but it shatters all the equipment on the outside. It blows off all the cameras. And if all of those vision devices get shattered or get destroyed or get covered up, then you have a useless machine, and the crew under such conditions just simply retreats, and you have these abandoned crewless vehicles, by the dozen,
right,
that show up in videos. Now, at the same time, from the American side, from the Ukrainian side, there's a similar highly effective sort of targeted response where any artillery gets counter battery action. And I don't know who's right. Like the people like McGregor and others are saying that Russians have a 10-1 artillery advantage, therefore Ukraine should lose the war. But how do they know?
He says he has people on the ground there that report to him. What does that mean? I don't know. Yeah. He is.
How do you even know what?
He is a colonel, a former colonel. He has been he was in Trump's administration towards the end, so he's not like me and you, who are making what we can. But
I trust him to some extent, but I also think that if Americans were like raising the level of artillery that they're using, maybe we wouldn't hear about it. Maybe they're not completely incompetent to just like announce everything.
It's a war at the end of the day, right? Like almost everything that comes out of it is a lie. To some
extent. All fog of war, yeah. It's all propaganda.
So, but I don't think that there's like a quick, rapid victory for any of the sides. Okay. So the main question is China interested in the war? Mm-hmm. And how much economy do they have to supply equipment to Russia?
Right.
Does Russia have enough, capability to keep producing artillery shells and small drones and mines?
Right.
Does Iran want to help enough? How is the oil market worldwide? The oil is expensive now, as far as I understand. And there's no way to stop oil from like flowing out of Russia. It's too big.
Mm-hmm.
So
the way I see it is it's, in order to counter the hundreds of billions of dollars in equipment that we're sending in, they need a bunch of shit too. They need a bunch of money. They need a bunch of equipment as well. So it not only comes down to the X's and O's of who's shooting at each other and who's killing who and who's winning and who's gaining the next 5 feet, but also like who's keeping the supply line best fed and all that stuff. There's more to war than just the guys exchanging bullets on the front line.
I don't think that they are. They're not very happy. The Russians are not very happy with. They are partly happy with the fact that they took Mariupol and the entire coast and got access to the sea, and they're controlling most of the oil in Ukraine, the shale oil, and that coal region is very rich with various minerals. They secured Crimea's water supply and up until the dam was blown up. So that was a temporary victory. Mm-hmm. And the Crimea water supply was a big humanitarian crisis and a crime against humanity that was, when this was blocked by Ukrainians.
So let me ask you a follow-up question there, and then we'll get into the next thing here. But the dam, it was funny because it reminds me of the Spider-Man meme where everybody's pointing, their old Spider-Man are pointing at each other, and everybody's saying it's you. Everybody blamed each other. What is your thoughts on like who was behind it? How did that happen? It didn't make sense to me. That I know the water supply to Crimea is very important because there's no natural water source there, I believe. Yes. So if you destroy the dam, which then helps provide you the water, you've cut off your own water supply. Human beings need to drink water to live, especially when you're in a fucking war. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? What exactly happened there?
I'm leaning towards, I don't know. So I know that the level of the explosion, how rapidly it occurred, indicates that what was used was something gigantic. Some people are saying that it must have been like possibly like a tactical, even nuclear device, which was used to there are devices that are like individual diver level. Like they're brought on with their own motor attached to some tactical naval object, like a naval blocking wall or something.
Yeah, to blow up a dam, it's not going to be any easy task, right?
Yes, it is. I think eventually somebody will calculate it more precisely. I suspect that it could not have been easily done with like just C4.
Okay.
That it was a very, very hard operation to do. because of just the weight of and size of the whole thing and how much water it actually blocked. So to do it so rapidly where it just like collapses, instead of like you could blow up the top,
and there's just be a little hole.
Yeah, and then for the entire thing to collapse the way it did, it's suspect. Who's interested is also weird. I think the water barrier existed there whether the river was overflowing or not. The losses will mostly be on the Russian side, and I think thousands of people died, which we probably don't know about yet. Once the water level goes down, so from the moment the dam was blown up to the moment where the water covered like entire villages was 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
Notification was probably less than that. So I expect like thousands of people in basements, in homes, just dead, being discovered on the southern side of the river, possibly on the Ukrainian northern side as well. But I think I was told the Ukrainian side of the bank was higher.
So was what you're saying is like most of the casualties are going to be on the Russian-controlled side of this thing,
probably,
which would be
just
counterintuitive to or at least
for them kind of
counterintuitive to them having done it, right?
But
it's not impossible. Like it's
the
not
level of
impossible.
Insanity is that it's credible to accuse everyone.
Sure, yeah.
There is now. I don't think most of the government in Ukraine is that bloodthirsty. But in their power group, in the military units, if that was necessary, there's definitely people who would do like a crime like it. Something and in the Russian government, I mean, of course.
Yeah, it's not above. It's not beneath them. Sure.
Sir, go ahead.
Yeah, no, okay. I was gonna move on to the last thing here, the more recent story about the Zaporizhzhia, right? Is that how you say it?
Zaporizhzhia.
Okay, the nuclear power plant there. So I have an article real quick from the New York Times. This is why you're here, right? To counter the Western propaganda. Ukrainian nuclear plant is just one of an innumerable problems for its neighbors. Ukrainians who live near the power plant have grown largely complacent about dangers, despite warnings that the facility has a bullseye on it. This article, so let's say Zelensky keeps warning of an impending nuclear tragedy. His military intelligence chief, Budanov, recently said the Russians have drafted and approved a plan to sabotage the nuclear power plant, Europe's biggest. Everyone is kind of echoing this. Highlighted it a little bit down here. A lot of these articles around this are singing kind of like the woe is the people living around the nuclear power plant. Like the theme of all
you got to make everybody feel bad for them.
Correct. Like that's what I noticed. Like all the theme is the same. Like all the articles have a similar theme about the poor people who live around the power plant. Never has one of the world's largest nuclear facilities fallen into bullseyes of large-scale war. Already, parts of 2 reactors have been hit by artillery and by a large caliber bullet. Though most by one bullet, yeah. Though most engineers believe the plant is strong enough to withstand such attacks. The Ukrainian engineers keeping the plant from melting down are reaching their own breaking point. They've been working for months at gunpoint, according to interviews with current and former employees. And Russian soldiers have dragged scientists and technicians off to a place called the Pit, where they were interrogated and beaten, a former director said. Keep going here real quick. Ukrainian army is on the march. According to Ukrainian officials, Russians recently mined the cooling pond that keeps the reactors from melting down and have begun to withdraw some of their own experts. An ominous sign, they say. The situation is very dangerous, Zelensky said. We've received information from our intelligence that Russia is planning to cause a radiation release. I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to show what Senator Rich Blumenthal said today, and then we'll give our comments after, where he tweeted, he says, if Putin is planning a nuclear disaster, he needs an unmistakable message. Significant harm to NATO allies from radiation dispersed by his use of tactical nuclear weapons or damage to a nuclear plant will be regarded as an Article 5 attack. For those who might not be familiar, that means it's an attack on NATO. That means that all of NATO is then bound,
including America,
go into war against whoever attacked the one country. What they're talking about is if this release of radiation gets into the air and wafts over there, perhaps into Poland or something like that, that's an attack on NATO. I don't know, man. Cass, give me your thoughts on this whole thing. What do you think this story is, if credible at all?
I think that what what the State Department, what our power group, in Washington would want, and this is like, I'll give my overall conclusion, which is a guesstimate, right? Is that they want to slow walk us into an open war, more open war with Russia, but slow walk us in such a way that neither side would be interested in escalating it to an actual nuclear war.
They want a conventional war, is what you're telling me.
They want boots on the ground over there, that's for sure.
They want more equipment on the ground, more money being spent, possibly some NATO units involved, from countries that they're willing to throw into that breach. Maybe not, probably not Americans. Actually, I would doubt that, but maybe more American special forces, volunteers, stuff like that. So how do they do that? Which is, they need a reason to use NATO troops without an actual nuclear war as a result. And that's why there's escalation of this type of escalatory language that the Russians will probably deny. But the Russians have a similar, they have an interesting idea there as well. It is quite possible that Russians do plan to do some kind of a dirty attack like that. Why? Let's say that there is a reactor meltdown impending. This gives everybody a face-saving reason to tell Ukraine to just suffer. Tell Ukraine to just, accept a peace deal at basically being forced by the West. And the way it can be sold is that, look, we have a nuclear power plant that's melting down. We need to have people on the ground right now, within a few days before it melts down. So let's do a peace deal with Russia so that we can save the world. And Ukrainians, sorry, Ukrainians, you got to suffer now, loss of territory permanently. But we get to save the world with the nuclear power plant that's going to be saved. And then there's like Russian engineers working together, civilian engineers with American civilian engineers, to save the planet. And everybody forgets, these years of warfare, hopefully.
I akin that to they haven't given, at least to today, like they haven't given Putin any good off ramp, I think, from this war so far. He's trying, perhaps you're saying, to create his own off ramp and save face. That
would be this is an idea I had while reading this, and it's a very raw idea, but that would be like an interesting idea of, if Zelensky is saying something true, which I don't believe so, but the normal reason, which would probably find on anti-war and other websites, which is, this is just like fear-mongering so that he gets more money, fear-mongering so he gets more support, which is he ought to do, because that's what he's supposed to do as the leader of a country under attack. He's supposed to appear as weak as possible. I'm about to collapse, but no, I'm not collapsing yet.
Overcompensate, right?
He has to balance this idea that he's losing, because if he's losing too much, then, or makes the appearance that he's always losing, then he's going to lose all support, because why support a losing race?
Right. Well, for democracy, that's why.
Right. You mean to tell me this isn't about democracy, defending democracy?
Yeah. Right. So he is playing with his own balance. At the same time, another factor is that my estimate is that if Russia ever does use tactical nuclear weapons, I heard that from another analyst, and I tend to believe that they are only capable of doing that on their own territory.
So, seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean,
well,
I feel like it's unlikely even in Ukraine, just because of the proximity to Moscow. Like if you were to just nuke, New York was at war with Massachusetts, and then we nuked Boston. I'm like, well, the winds start blowing back over here. We're in trouble. It's very close proximity. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just a little bit counterintuitive.
Here's the risk. It is a tactical nuke could be very effective at certain things. If it's timed right, and if there's enough enemy military units in the vicinity, it can cause real demoralizing damage. It can cause like the war to end.
Wipe out an entire army with one tactical nuke, or
maybe even if it misses the army, but it presents such a shock to the world, where all the power players that are currently like betting on, let's keep gambling, this is good, let's keep gambling, this is fine. When a nuke goes off, everybody will be legitimately afraid. That will be like crossing the Rubicon, and then there will be off-ramps from that moment. But Russia can't do it on NATO grounds or Ukraine grounds, in my mind, because that would it would cause allegations of fallout, which would bring in exactly what Blumenthal is saying. Full NATO involvement.
So my conspiracy theory here, which I kind of fleshed out on Twitter a little bit, I'm like, this kind of reminds me of what Colonel McGregor was saying. If Ukraine really has in effect lost, the West doesn't want to lose this war. They want to commit soldiers or get more involved to try and back up Ukraine, because Ukraine is in effect lost, according to McGregor. How do you do that? You need an attack on NATO to invoke Article 5. They've now, again, not me or you,
laid the groundwork.
Richard Blumenthal, a senator in the United States, has said, if irradiated winds blow into Poland, that's an attack on NATO. Therefore, we can commit all our soldiers, or whatever, however it is we want to go about battle plans to get in there. So that's the way I'm thinking about this. I mean, like, they could be setting the stage for a false flag type of event that then draws them into war, gives them the pretext, or at least a justification to like intervene with our own forces, or with
that's exactly
Lithuanian forces or Polish forces. I know the Polish are really fucking gung-ho about getting into this thing themselves. So what do we know at the end of the day? But
we know several things. One of the things we do know is that there are some hints in that article. In that article, they buried the lead, as you had to scroll more than half the article to find the actual,
as they normally do, right?
Pertinent thing. But the lead was mostly right. So the actual nuclear power plants that are there, those are the types that have the concrete shell on them. They have a containment vessel, and that thing is impenetrable for most conventional artillery. You would have to, in order to penetrate it, like crack it, you would have to shell the same spot with artillery and like hit multiple times. You have to do it intentionally. And it would be something that would be noticed, and you would like start getting warnings about, hey, you're doing this, stop. Hey, it'll be very difficult to hide in progress.
What you're doing. Okay.
Now, the reason why Russians are interrogating everybody who's working in that plant is because the worst thing that can happen is sabotage. Inside the plant, that's a different story.
Yeah, kill them from within.
Inside, if you damage the wrong type of equipment, you will lose the ability to cool, and the thing will become an immediate, as we said, possible off-ramp from the war. And that's how the plant is vulnerable. Also, I think the plant is on like a ticking time because the water was cut. So if Russia doesn't, I don't know how many months they have to restore some kind of water flow, but there was that something like that in the news. That it is slowly heating up within the pool, like the waste.
Right, a nuclear reactor needs to constantly be cooled down. Yeah.
One thing that our news are using, but that people should know, is the radiation is not that dangerous. The whole story of Chernobyl, the HBO show, very great show, actually very naturalistic. But the most unnatural part was the propaganda part, meaning when they were in front of was it Yeltsin? No, not Yeltsin. Gorbachev. When they were in front of Gorbachev, the guy with the birthmark,
on the last leader of the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah, and when they scared him, like, this will take out half of Europe and the world. Nonsense. It could have taken out Kiev. Millions of people could have been affected, even reached into like the water supply, but it would not have affected Europe. Everybody got irradiated by that thing, including me, probably, because I was Was I alive at the time? Maybe, I don't know. but, uh, but at least the clouds were there. But once the cloud starts dispersing, the level of exposure is probably not that great. You know, people were afraid of the level of exposure from Fukushima on U.S. coast. It was less exposure than picking up the wrong type of rock on the shores of California.
Right, I've heard that. Yeah,
I think
that ties into that a little bit, man. There's been a lot of fear mongering around nuclear power in general.
No way, really?
You know, especially now with the climate change narrative and all those things. It's a great out, right? Like, hey, you know, we need energy and clean, efficient way. We just use nuclear power. But then, on the other hand, they've convinced everybody, oh my God, Chernobyl, everyone's going to die.
France and Canada, Ontario, Canada, have the cleanest countries in the world in terms of CO2, and have highest percentage of nuclear facilities. I think France is like 60% of their entire industry and like all of their power is nuclear. They're recycling their fuel constantly, so they only they get nuclear weapons for the recycling because they're isolating the dangerous stuff that could actually produce nuclear bombs from the fuel, which is like the thing that poisons the fuel. They extract it, and then they what happens in our power plants in the United States is that we throw away really good uranium. Well, we put it in these casks where it's very safe. Everything about nuclear is like peak safety compared to every other energy technology. More people die from solar power, from falling off the roofs,
right,
including all the disasters. And the thing is also, nuclear bombs are not dangerous in themselves when they explode. Yes, there's radiation waves that occur that if you're in the vicinity, you will get irradiated possibly and die from radiation. But the radiation that's most dangerous disappears first, has the half-life. That's why it's dangerous, because it's such a quick, it's so active. There's stuff that gets in the food that you have to worry about that settles with dust. But once this thing disperses, that doesn't threaten humanity much because background is much higher. You live with around granite formations. You get naturally. You take a plane ride, you get
when irradiated. You buy a home in the United States, you take one. You basically have to get one of those tests. Damn it, what is it called? I don't remember what it's called.
Radon gas, possibly. Yeah.
It's they do a test basically, like to test the ground.
I just heard the word today.
I did it when I bought my house here, like to test the ground. What's the radiation level coming from? I can't remember the name of it.
You know, though, there is a
level. Yeah, there is a level.
I have a funny feeling in the distant future that this episode will get pulled for spreading misinformation.
Yes,
if this nuclear power plant goes up. Yep.
Sure. Well, copy it on Rumble.
I don't want to downplay the danger of nuclear weapons. Obviously, there's to varying degrees.
No, they
there's
have a danger.
ICBMs, and then there's tactical nukes. So
the danger is, besides the destruction, is it brings out the dust, and I don't know how many. We haven't tested how many of these explosions occurring simultaneously cause like a nuclear winter.
Yeah,
but it might be just like less than a dozen of the big ones go off, and then we have like no food for a decade.
Right. There's enough dust in the atmosphere that the sun can't get through. All the plants die. All the animals die because they have nothing to eat. Then we die.
Yeah, that's the type of stuff that's really like I think the scariest part of the scenario.
Right.
For the survivors of because the radiation isn't the thing.
Okay.
Normally.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, Cap, you have any other questions before we wrap this thing up? We've gone a little bit over time here, so I think
this has been a nice in-depth education and inside education for me.
No, it was great fun, and I hope people look. There's good videos from prior wars that Russia engaged in, and you can actually see the faces of all of these guys that we talked about. You can look them in the eyes and see, oh, these are the guys that did all of those things. It's well documented. So you don't have to rely on, you can reach your own conclusions based on.
You're telling people to do research. It's easier said than done.
Fair enough, but it's a good idea.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
If you want to
go
track
ahead.
some of my takes, you can find me on Free Kasimir. And I do memes. I plan to do some philosophical videos, but then some reviews as well.
Very good.
Stay on this topic, man. You know your shit.
Yeah.
You are invaluable, like cutting through like the fog of war when there's not a lot of Americans who know what the fuck's going on in the whole scenario. So thank you for coming on and giving us a little bit of lesson in the whole thing. I appreciate you.
A little bit. It's just because I know the language and I watch some of the sources. So I have I know the Ukrainian story, I know a little bit of the Russian story, and when you get several of them, you can sort of navigate. And I also listen to good people like Mikhail Veller, who are really eventually compress the information into a plausible scenario that matches my understanding of politics.
Okay, so I'm going to be relying on you a lot in the next couple of months as long as this war goes on. Just in terms of also I don't speak the language. When I watch a video of Zelensky or Putin, I'm relying on the fact that the translation isn't bullshit.
Isn't propaganda.
The fuck do I know, right? I have no idea what the guy said. I can't, for the most part, I'll go to a place that I'm pretty sure is not lying, but I really don't have anywhere to verify that myself if Putin said some crazy thing or if he didn't.
It's mostly actually really good these days. It's harder to lie this way because there's so many open source AI translators and other engines. So it's sort of hard to deceive people. What happens, the way deception works right now is if you don't save a video, it disappears.
Okay.
In the Ukraine war, I had videos a year ago that were important for me to explain narratives.
Right.
And I couldn't get access to them because they get
scrubbed or censored.
They get scrubbed for sure.
Right. For sure. Yeah, because they spin a different narrative as opposed to whatever's being tried to.
That narrative's no longer works in their favor.
Sure. All right, Cass. Thank you again, man, for joining us.
Take care.
Captain, sign us off, dude.
Kasimir, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for educating us. Doom Nation, I hope you guys enjoyed another episode of Two Doom Men. Tune in next week for our 200th episode. It's going to be good. Can't wait to see you guys there. Have a great night. Adios.